Attorney General Jeff Sessions submitting his letter of resignation. And by the way, it begins, "Dear Mr. President, at your request, I am submitting my resignation." That tells you everything you need to know. Let's get some instant analysis from someone who knows all about this stuff. Joe DiGenova, he's our legal analyst here at WMAL and a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Well, Joe, you're not surprised, are you?
No, this was inevitable and necessary for the president to have a full-time attorney general that he could rely on a daily basis for consultation, and this is not a surprise.
So based on that response, is there any doubt in your mind that this is all about Russia? This has nothing to do with whatever Attorney General Sessions may have done with regard to enforcing immigration law or any other law. This is about Russia.
Well, this is about the Attorney General not having a command presence, not appearing to know what the department is doing, not appearing to be in control of the department, appearing to be under the thumb of the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. This is a precursor to the exodus of Rosenstein, but it is a necessary precursor, again, because the president is entitled to a full-time Attorney General, which he has not had since Inauguration Day.
And in terms of the political jiu-jitsu maneuver here, it's really quite brilliant. He's obviously unhappy with Rod Rosenstein. I don't know any Republican who is happy with Rod Rosenstein. But if he fires Rosenstein, people start screaming obstruction of justice. Firing Sessions, you can't claim obstruction of justice because he's recused from Russia. And now he's named Matthew Whitaker, who has been the chief of staff to Sessions. He's a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, making him acting attorney general. He basically has replaced Rosenstein because Whitaker has no conflict. He can step right in and take over Russia from Rosenstein, right?
That is correct. He was brought on to be the chief of staff, and he's a very well-known guy amongst people in the administration.
And so, in a way, Rosenstein is now irrelevant in terms of overseeing. Am I right in saying that? He can basically, Whitaker can now take over Russia, and Rosenstein's out of that picture.
Unless there are some facts and circumstances with which we are not familiar, he should be able to displace Rosenstein as the overseer of Mueller. Now, the question may be, does he want to do that? My guess is he better.
Well, and why wouldn't? I mean, that would be appropriate if there's a special counsel investigating something as serious as the allegations that have been made, even though you and I both know that there's nothing to them. Wouldn't you want your acting attorney general instead of a deputy overseeing that?
Yes, and in fact, I'm sure this was discussed with Mr. Whitaker and settled before it was agreed that he would be named the acting Attorney General. Now,
Joe DiGenova, President Trump has tweeted, as he's wont to do, about 15 minutes ago. It says, "We are pleased to announce that Matthew G. Whitaker, Chief of Staff to Attorney General Jeff Sessions at the Department of Justice, will become our new acting Attorney General of the United States. He will serve our country well. We thank Attorney General Jeff Sessions for his service and wish him well. A permanent replacement will be nominated at a later date." Does that mean that Whitaker is not going to be the guy for the long term? He truly is just a stopgap.
Well, I would assume that. I would assume the president wants someone who has gravitas and is well known and can be confirmed. That there are a number of people that would suit that bill, but I think your assumption is correct.
And by the way, Joe, the Republicans picking up 3 seats, it looks like. There's a couple of Senate races still in question, a couple heading to recounts perhaps. But the fact that the Republicans have gained their majority in the Senate by some measure, that factors into this confirmation process, doesn't it? Because the bar is a little bit lower now for whoever the Attorney General might be.
Yeah, I think that the Democrats are going to be careful about the way they conduct themselves in any more confirmation hearings as a result of their abysmal performance in the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing. I think they realized that they did severe damage to themselves in the election, especially in the Senate, and they probably cut down on the numbers of seats that they won in the House as a result of the Kavanaugh effect. So, yeah. Yes, I think that's You're correct, Larry.
Joe, Special Prosecutor Mueller has pretty much not done anything since Labor Day, I think, or we haven't heard anything from him at least. Are you expecting now that the midterms are over that we might see Mueller coming forward, maybe even close to delivering his final report?
Well, I'm hearing rumblings that he's going to charge one or two more people with lying to the FBI about what they knew during this process. I have not heard who they are, but I've heard substantial rumblings about that. My guess is that he would not issue a report until those activities were done, unless they are substantially unrelated to the Russian thing. As you know, there's all kinds of other cases around that have nothing to do with Russia,
yes,
which is about 90% of all of his work has nothing to do with collusion, certainly, and not very little with Russia, other than these crazy internet cases that he has brought. He, of course, I want to repeat again for our listeners, he does not have the authority to issue a public report. All he can do is report to the Attorney General now. He cannot issue a public report. He has no authority to do that. He cannot send a report to Congress. Only the Attorney General can do that, and only after having gotten permission from the United States Court of Appeals to report any information that might be grand jury, which, of course, is always secret unless a court orders it not to be.
That is very important to bear in mind. And now that Matthew Whitaker, the acting Attorney General, will be put into that place, assuming that whatever ethics or conflict questions are resolved, he'll be the point person on that. Now, knowing how this works, Joe DiGenova, knowing how a special counsel interacts with the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, is there any kind of transition here? Is it what is the process like? Mueller doesn't have to sort of restart. Whitaker can't come in here and say, "What the heck have you been doing, Mueller? All right, I'm giving you new direction." I mean, are we?
Well, theoretically, he could do that. If he takes over from Rod Rosenstein, he's not bound by anything that Rosenstein has done. The likelihood of him doing that as an acting Attorney General is not very high. But this is a very interesting maneuver by the president. Matthew Whitaker, as Chief of Staff, was not confirmed by the United States Senate. That is an administrative position appointed by the Attorney General. So I'm actually a little, I'm quite interested in the methodology by which this appointment of him as acting Attorney General has occurred.
Yeah.
I would like to see the appointment papers.
I thought about that too, but knowing that he's a former U.S. attorney, he has gone through a Senate confirmation process. But is there a time limit on that?
If he is still a U.S. attorney, like if he was the U.S. attorney down in Alabama and he was brought up, then he's fine. He's been confirmed, and that's probably what occurred here.
Interesting. But that is a fascinating sort of insight. And, of course, what you're alluding to is you can only be the acting Attorney General if you have gone through and still are under an active Senate confirmation process, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And knowing Jeff Sessions, I mean, you don't know him on a deeply personal basis, but he is a man of integrity, even though he's made some miscalculations along the way in the last 2 years. His letter just drips of loyalty to President Trump, in my opinion. And do you think that he's going to maintain that? Because you know how this town works. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him to, give that exclusive interview and just rip his former boss a new one.
Well, if Jeff is smart, he will quietly go about his business, leave the department, go back to Alabama, ensconce himself doing something productive and lucrative. He has a lot of friends in Alabama. I'm sure he won't have any problem finding a place to work, to stay, to teach, perhaps. So I think the last thing Jeff Sessions needs to be doing is giving interviews. He's very bad at it.
I don't disagree with that at all. Any story behind the story that we're missing on this, or is it pretty cut and dry? The president was waiting for the midterms. He's pulled the trigger on it, and he's got a man in place now that can basically supersede Rosenstein. Is there anything else we're missing?
No, I spoke with the president last week, and I'm not surprised by this, and I'm not surprised at the rapidity with which it occurred. And so I think there's nothing here you don't already know.
One last question. The fate of Rod Rosenstein now, is the time ticking on his position as well? Do you expect him to go, or does he need to go now that he's kind of rendered out of the picture?
Well, Rosenstein, of course, is a manipulator, and he will be calculating, and already has, I'm sure he was informed by Sessions that this was going to occur, and he has no doubt put in a drawer personal notes, just like Comey did, about his interactions with the Attorney General and his comments. And I'm sure that in the fullness of time, he will be as graceless and as vicious as Comey. I want to say this very clearly. I don't see any reason not to be honest about this. I do not like Rod Rosenstein. I believe that he betrayed the President of the United States. I believe not only is he disloyal, I believe that he is fundamentally dishonest, and he should not be the Deputy Attorney General. And I long for the day when he is similarly gone from the department, which he has injured profoundly by his conduct. Just ask yourself this question. Why is it that every move that Rod Rosenstein takes has with it a confusion about motivation and why it happened and the timing of it and everything? What is it about him that makes him almost a cartoon-like character who simply falls into all of these awful situations where all of his motives are misunderstood? BS.
Well said, Joe DiGenova, and I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us at a moment's notice on this big breaking story, Joe. Always good to get your insights.
Thank you, Larry, very much.